Hello, and welcome back to All Routes Considered, a podcast brought to you by the A to B Global Media Transport News Network. Tiana, it's been a little while, hasn't it? How are you? How's life? What's new? Give the audience the latest on Sheba.
Yeah, so Sheba is my foster cat, for those who don't know. She's actually finally been adopted. She's going to a home on Thursday. So by the time this comes out, she will probably be in her new home. She's going to a lovely place on the edge of the moor where she will have lots of space to explore with a lovely family who also used to foster cats. So I'm very excited for her, but also very sad. It'll be sad to say goodbye to her. She's been with me since January, so I've got used to her being in my house. But I'm off to the US soon to go to some transport related events over there. So obviously I won't be home to be with Sheba anyway. So it's good that she's going to have forever home. But yeah, things have been busy, which is why
Yeah.
we haven't done a podcast in a couple of weeks. But good to be chatting to you again. Strange to be doing it not face to face this time, giving something different a go.
As you can see, audience members, we're recording this in a slightly different method to the usual way, but we wanted to give it a try. And with Tiana going, to all of these events in the US, we wanted to just give this a little road test and, maybe see how things might work out for other projects in the future. But we will say no more on that one for now. So I swear we're not always going to start every episode with a chat about HS2, but it's kind of hard not to um, with the state of things at the moment. So just this week, the UK government announced a set of revised costs and a new delivery timeline for HS2. And the Transport Secretary has outlined plans to reset the high-speed rail project following what's been described by ministers as years of mismanagement. So, Tiana, what's going on here with HS2? Because, I mean, it looks to me that the government is largely trying to reposition the whole scheme from sort of a failing mega project to like a more salvageable long-term investment.
Yeah, I think it's good to talk about this because obviously we kind of talked about some of the kind of proposals and whatnot last time of like, oh, they're cutting the speed, all these kind of things are kind of rumored. And at least now they've kind of laid out some clarity of like kind of definite points when it comes to like timeline, cost, speed.
Mm.
It's not positive news as such. Obviously, the cost has gone up. We always knew the cost was going to go up. They're saying between 87.7 billion and 102.7 billion is the
Mm.
new projected cost. Obviously, in 2012, the cost was said to be between 32 billion and 37.5 billion. And that was for like the fully proposed network. So these new costs are kind of for the scaled back version and are, significantly greater for several reasons. They're saying that certain things weren't factored into the initial proposals, and obviously, inflation delays always drives up the cost. So yeah, not great really that it was delayed in the first place, but can't change that. So at least now they're kind of setting out, like you said, a solid plan of we're going to do it. This is how much it's going to cost. This is when it's going to come into effect. So I think they're saying between 2036 and 2039 that it will start running and then will extend a bit again to the West Coast Main Line and stuff between 2040 and 2043. It should happen in our lifetimes, Joey. We should
Well,
we should maybe
that's
one day ride an HS2 train.
we might we
Yeah,
might
but they have
yeah.
also confirmed that it will be at 320 kilometers per hour, 200 miles per hour, rather than the initial 360, which we
Yeah.
talked about last time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that sort of feels like a more practical goal rather than before it seemed like they were almost trying to, I don't know, sort of make a statement, make it this big sort of impressive thing.
Yeah, I guess at this point we want to deliver it. We want it to increase
Yeah.
capacity. We want it there as a service.
It's going to be kind of impossible to actually judge whether or not it was a success within our lifetime, isn't it? Like it may start running, but like it's, that'll be for the next set of Joey and Tiana's on podcasts and sort of if they're doing
Little Joey riding
podcasts.
the train.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll see what they think about it
Okay.
in years to come. But no, yeah, I mean, for sure, there's a hell of a lot of lessons that are going to need to be learned from the development with regards to, anything in the future. Yes, I mean, HS2 is the gift that keeps on giving, or not, in a way.
Yeah, at least between London and Birmingham it will be. Yeah, I don't know if it'll ever be the gift that keeps on giving further north like we originally hoped it would, but
No, we'll have to wait for Northern Powerhouse Rail to see if that gives us something.
yeah, if Andy Burnham
Okay.
becomes Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other can of worms. Big changes in England, potentially. We'll see.
I
Right.
mean, we're
Okay.
also got some potential changes coming to the airport network in England again.
Yes, yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
onto what I would describe as sort of some more overtly positive news from
Yeah.
England, from the UK, is Doncaster Sheffield Airport. It's officially passed the first two stages of its airspace change process, which marks a pretty sort of key regulatory milestone ahead of its proposed reopening. It's been sort of strength to strength for Doncaster Airport recently, hasn't it, Tiana?
Yeah, I mean, they recently got confirmation of their loan as well for 57 million, I
Mm,
think. That's, money is a key enabler as well and enabling this to happen. And I think that was in doubt a little bit. There was a reform-led campaign from one of their
mm.
councillors who were kind of like, oh, yeah, we said you could have this money, but we're no longer going to give you this money. And the whole kind of project was in doubt a little bit, but now that's been confirmed as happening as well. And then they're kind of passing these, regulatory milestones, like you said. It's looking positive. I mean, the airport closed in 2022, was it? November 2022?
Mm.
And it's looking like it should open again this decade. So, they're saying 2027, 2028, which would be great to kind of, plug some of the gap in like our aviation airport network and kind of not always rely on everyone having to travel to the major hubs. I think it's positive, these regional airports definitely have a role to play.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice. It's quite exciting, isn't it? It's nice to hear about a project that's progressing in the way that everyone wants it to, and it's going to have a real tangible effect on the people living there. Yeah, I think it's really great, and I'm really excited.
I agree. Hopefully, we'll keep following the progress, keep writing about its news, and eventually, in a few years' time, we'll be like, it's opened.
Yeah. So from planes to buses, over in Dubai, the Roads and Transport Authority, the RTA, they've announced the official opening of the Mall of the Emirates Smart Bus Station, the city's first smart bus station. And I mean, with that, there's been quite a lot in the news recently about, bus infrastructure and digital solutions. And this is just, one of several things that we've covered lately. But it really feels like there's been a pretty conscious international effort to start shifting towards this kind of development, doesn't it?
Yeah, I like stories like this because I feel like bus infrastructure typically isn't smart or glamorous or particularly modern. It's not necessarily like the first place where you get new technologies. Because obviously, your standard bus stops there, a pole at the side of the road or whatever. And I think that kind of legacy moves on to like bus stations where they're not seen as high-end places. So I like, initiatives like this. And I think in Dubai, they're really trying to reduce this friction between transport modes. So all these digital technologies they're implementing, it's all about like interoperable travel with, live updates and connections and maps, as well as kind of, digital customer service and a virtual assistant who can help you plan your journey and respond to inquiries and everything like that. And I think it sounds smart and useful, and kind of can help change the overall experience of riding a bus, which isn't just what it's like on board the bus. It's what's it like while I'm waiting for this bus to arrive.
As I'm sure you do, I've had many an experience of just sort of waiting at these sort of horrible little bus stations across England. So I mean, it's great that the transport operators and companies are starting to really, pay attention to the more sort of granular detail of bus transport everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, all these stories we've talked about so far today, these latest news stories, they're all about kind of long-term transport planning and how we can kind of give a better experience to more people.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah.
that's what we're here for. That's what we like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of a better experience for many people, some might say a lot of people, today we're going to take a closer look at one of the most talked about infrastructure projects in North America, California High-Speed Rail. So earlier this month, a new draft business plan for the project proposed a set of pretty major key changes to construction sequencing, funding strategy, and delivery timelines, which CEO Ian Chowdhury discussed in more detail at the US High-Speed Rail Conference, with a focus on phased construction, procurement reform, and private sector investment. Obviously, California High-Speed Rail has been debated for years, but the focus is now finally starting to shift to operation and delivery. There's now a lot less discussion about abstract vision and more about actual sequencing, contracts, engineering, funding structures, everything. A move to actual implementation, construction.
Mhm.
Tiana, you attended the conference. Tell us what you know. What's changed with California High Speed Rail's latest strategy?
Yeah, so it was a really, really good conference. It was really good. It was organized and hosted by people who kind of clearly really cared about the future of high-speed rail. It wasn't just kind of, like a commercial event. There was sort of real passion behind it. And regarding California high-speed rail's most recent proposals, they certainly talked about this big shift regarding the proposed delivery. revolving now around a phased approach that could allow sections of the network to open earlier and be more incrementally implemented, especially if kind of current legislation and mandates are removed that require the Central Valley segment to be completed first at the moment. So with the existing plan, the authority is kind of limited to first building this 171-mile double-track route between Bakersfield, Fresno, and Merced. And then kind of before they can work on connecting tunnels through the mountain ranges towards San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles, they have to finish that section. But the draft plan's now kind of proposing amending this approach by allowing tunnel construction to start earlier and permitting initial train services to operate on like single track sections rather than waiting for kind of a whole double track network to be implemented. And then the infrastructure is still going to be designed for later expansion as the ridership and frequency demands increase. So under this kind of updated business plan or proposed business plan, there's 3 potential delivery scenarios. The first would complete only this Central Valley segment, with service beginning around 2033. And this is kind of seen as the least useful option, kind of this train to nowhere rather than connecting the big cities. And then the second scenario will prioritise extending the line north towards the Bay Area by 2039. So kind of similar to these HS2 timelines we were talking about. You know, this is a useful service that we could see happen in the next, 10, 15 years. But they'd still build enough infrastructure again to begin this through surface before later capacity upgrades are added. And then the third scenario would complete this full corridor between San Francisco and Los Angeles by around 2040, again with additional tracks and infrastructure delivered progressively as demand grows. And I think that's kind of what people want to hear. They want to hear, okay, this train is going to reach San Francisco, this train is going to reach Los Angeles.
Yeah, so within this plan, the authority seems to want to focus on just building what they need to start like some sort of service by those dates, get it sort of rolling, rather than getting it all in place in one fell swoop, right?
Yeah. So obviously, historically, the project was designed around building this full long-term configuration from the outset, including like fully double-tracked infrastructure, large stations, and major tunnel works. They wanted to do it all and then be like, right, we're opening it. But what the authority in Chowdhury is now saying is, like, we could preserve the corridor for the final system, but only construct the infrastructure required for initial operations and demand. So, they're acquiring all the lands for the full build out, and the standards of the engineering and everything would still support this 220 mile per hour operation. But some assets would be delivered in phases rather than all at once.
Yeah, and I mean, he himself argued this would make the project more financially efficient.
He made the point, crucially, that infrastructure starts costing money through maintenance the moment it kind of is built and enters service, whether it's being kind of utilised or not. So his argument's kind of essentially why maintain more tracks than you need to, especially if kind of initial ridership demands only require a certain amount. And like this makes sense, I think, like certainly to me, like especially if it helps deliver the project sooner and starts kind of proving the concept to people. Like if the initial service can start showing people how great high-speed rail is, then demand will increase. It'll justify building more and kind of make it easier to do so with, a bit of financial support coming in and public support. So it seems to me like a sensible plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's always better to, show rather than tell. And it seems that this is a real case of sort of here's what it's going to do. This is just like this is a portion of what we have planned, but the wider result in the end is going to think of this but expand it, and it seems like a really great way to entice people into using it and sort of proving how useful it will be in the end. So I mean, what else has been revised in the plan for the vision overall?
Yeah, so another kind of major topic was like procurement reform. So one of the biggest kind of changes in this area is the authority is now directly purchasing key construction materials itself instead of kind of leaving procurement to the contractors. So this includes things like rails, concrete ties, poles, fibre systems, wires, cables, all these kind of key elements. And Chowdhury kind of described this at the conference almost like creating a central warehouse, like a home depot that contractors can kind of just visit for ease and convenience and kind of instead focus purely on the installation and construction they've been hired to do. And this should kind of reduce supply chain risks and speed up delivery, which again is going to, be a positive thing and help make this project happen. They've also changed the way contracts are awarded. So they're using indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts, and multiple award task orders to kind of, again, accelerate delivery and help supply chain access. And this kind of creates a pool of pre-qualified contractors that the authority can issue work packages to as projects are ready, rather than kind of repeatedly going through long procurement processes. So it's kind of all about just sort of streamlining delivery now, which is music to our ears, surely.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like there's also a much bigger emphasis on private investment now. I mean, obviously, that's something that the authority's been talking about for a while, especially since the federal government cancelled, previously awarded funding grants.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like the authority, has actively said they're discussing partnerships with infrastructure investors and renewable energy developers and telecommunication companies, like as well as co-development firms. I'd like to say that this is kind of thanks to financial support from the state. Like state funding, the commitments made there have helped create this financially stable project that's kind of necessary to attract the private sector interest, which was kind of removed once the federal grants were removed. So it isn't a matter here of kind of replacing the federal funding with private investment. I very much believe that federal funding should be a key enabler in the future of high-speed rail and has been instrumental in the successful networks that you see worldwide. So kind of you need this stable funding to then attract private investment. And that's what the state here is hopefully doing. And this is kind of alongside the authority's new flexible delivery outlook that should help it kind of stay open to multiple partnership structures and delivery models. Kind of its flexibility could allow work to proceed simultaneously in different regions if the financing and commercial structures align, which will obviously be really positive. Like crucially, Chowdhury kind of repeatedly framed this railway not just as a transport system, but as a kind of broader infrastructure corridor. So they're looking at things like broadband and renewable energy and station area development and concessions and logistics, everything like that, rather than just kind of the train and the tracks.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds a lot like how airports or international rail systems operate.
Well, yeah, for sure. And like Chowdhury did kind of make that comparison directly and referenced companies like Japan, Italy, Spain, France, Germany, where profitable high-speed rail systems don't rely solely on passenger fares. Internationally, rail corridors, alongside airports and stuff like you said, they generate revenue through multiple complementary businesses, not just kind of ticket fares. Yeah, so I think that's really kind of key to their future plans.
Yeah, so I mean, will this include energy infrastructure for the actual network itself?
Yeah, so they are initially planning for the system to connect into California's existing utility grid, but then they're likewise exploring renewable energy partnerships tied to the corridor for kind of future implementation. So I think there's very much the possibility of private investors building clean energy infrastructure that could support, like along the tracks, could support both the rail operations and the surrounding communities. So again, they're thinking about the corridor as this multi-use infrastructure platform rather than just, your tracks and your trains.
Yeah. So through this approach, could California high-speed rail become a model for future US projects?
Well, historically, the project has obviously faced many delays and PR issues like we've touched on briefly. So I don't think anyone would want to repeat that or kind of taint themselves with the same brush by be like, we're following in the footsteps of California high-speed rail. But obviously, if, we can move past that and focus on kind of this new delivery approach and hopefully create a new kind of positive narrative moving forward, then, there's definitely lessons learned and things to be taken forward here. One really kind of notable thing that Chowdhury talked about as well was this kind of idea of shared procurement structures and streamlining permitting. And he really kind of encouraged other agencies to essentially piggyback off California's supplier relationship and procurement systems rather than kind of starting from scratch and having to do their own negotiations. And this could really sort of streamline future projects if they kind of go to suppliers and be like, California high-speed rail already negotiated this agreement with you, we want the same. And if that could kind of be replicated, that's, going to save time and costs. I think crucially, this could also help enable standardization across the nation. So at the moment, this kind of absence of agreed national standards causes increases in capital costs and complexity during construction. And without common requirements for systems such as signaling, rolling stock, rail specifications, these projects risk creating isolated networks that cannot be easily interoperate, or they limit the efficiency of kind of a future national system. And this fragmentation ultimately slows down delivery and kind of weakens the case for a unified high-speed rail program across the US rather than just across California. This is also a key lesson to be learned from Europe, which has had to spend billions on addressing and reversing the effects of early fragmentation with technical standards across different national systems. And without kind of similar national standardization and arguably a federal lead to ensure that, the US kind of risks repeating these same mistakes.
Yeah, well, I mean, we write about signaling projects in Europe all the time. There's always hefty investments being made into ETCS, all stuff like that. And I mean, with these considerations in mind, it would surely make sense to frame high-speed rail in the US as a national infrastructure rather than just a smaller sort of partisan project.
Yeah, like which is the approach that's kind of was taken to like highways and aviation. And like obviously transport systems, they work best when they're treated as a coordinated national system rather than a collection of separate projects because we want them all to connect. And one of the arguments that was made at the High Speed Rail Conference was that major US infrastructure historically succeeded when there was a strong federal framework, like the interstate highway system or the expansion of aviation in the 20th century. And these systems really worked because there was a clear national definition of the network and the funding structure and delivery responsibility that went along with that.
So the argument essentially is that high-speed rail should be treated the same way.
Well, yeah, I don't see why not. And several speakers made this case. And if the US wants to scale high-speed rail beyond kind of these early isolated corridor, it needs this kind of shared national vision, including things like technical standards, long-term funding clarity, and interoperability between lines. Kind of without that, you risk building systems that don't connect efficiently or can't be expanded into a true national network later on.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess the question is though, do you think the US public would really get on board with this kind of investment?
I mean, currently, no, like not everyone would. Like that's kind of is the reality of the situation. But also, I think that like a lot of Americans do feel like they are missing out. Certainly, kind of people in our generation or people who have traveled and kind of see how these systems work abroad. Public perception, though, is kind of really key to this argument. And at the conference, a lot of emphasis was placed on making high-speed rail feel relevant to people's everyday lives rather than just kind of an abstract infrastructure goal. So rather than just talking about network miles or GDP impact, kind of the speakers really highlighted things like reduced travel times, better access to jobs, and expanded housing across cities. And there was this really kind of strong point about storytelling, showing communities and workers and passengers that they're kind of part of the project and can see and feel the benefits. Even it's just kind of as simple as, telling people how they could go out for the day, visit attraction, go for lunch or dinner, see a show, travel back and kind of be in their own bed and kind of do all this within like this reasonable time frame that wouldn't be possible if they were driving. And little things like that can kind of tangibly impact people's opportunities and lifestyles. We've discussed before in like the previous episode we did how in the current political age, arguing in favor of environmental stewardship doesn't always encourage people to support a project. But here there's really kind of an emphasis on high-speed rail being about providing something good rather than taking away something considered bad. This isn't the plastic straw in the situation where we're like, hey, you can no longer have this because it's bad for the environment. It's about being like, hey, here, have something good. And like currently with like fuel prices rising, congestion increasing, Americans are kind of being denied access to affordable, efficient mobility people elsewhere in the world benefit from through high-speed rail. And kind of through this sort of argument, it can resonate with American pride and, American people. Like, surely this, country that's successful in many ways should be capable of delivering and leveraging such technology. At the conference, Keith Wilson, who's the mayor of Portland in Oregon, he noted that like Morocco has high-speed rail, despite having only 1% of the GDP of the US. So like this kind of lack of the technology in the US arguably represents a shortfall that like is having negative implications for its people. And like when you think about it that way, the American people should want to back it. They should want to get behind it.
Yeah, I've never really understood this. How does America not have this? Something that,
Yeah.
we have. It's galling really. I've never been able to understand it. It just seems like such a basic thing, in 2026. I mean, it seemed like a basic thing in 2020 to have anything like this. Like the state of the
And
rail network over there is really sort of it's surprising, I would say. Just
yeah, I
surprising.
mean but its geography is so well set up for it. You've got all these kind of like triangular network corridors and
Mm.
stuff that kind of would mean that they wouldn't have to like comparatively to Europe, they wouldn't have to like actually build too many like thousand route miles and that kind of thing. They really could deliver an efficient transport network that would reach like 70% of their population quite easily. And they don't. They sit in traffic instead.
It's strange that they haven't. It's taken them this long to sort of get to this point, and even at this point, it's not even a guaranteed sort of inevitability.
No, and it's so isolated to the states that are backing it. You've got
Yes, yeah.
California, you've got Nevada, you've got a few whispers in Texas, but like
Mm.
that doesn't produce the full benefits of having this kind of nationwide, hey, I want to go from Chicago to Dallas. Rail is an
Yeah,
efficient way of doing that.
which is crazy because I can get on a train here and go to Manchester,
Yeah, I mean, obviously
an
the
hour.
UK is a much smaller country than
Yeah,
America.
yeah.
And so in a way, I think you'd have more success in comparing Europe, like as the whole
Mm,
continent, to America. I'd say there's
sure.
kind of more similarities there. And obviously you can get around Europe quite well
Mm,
by
yeah,
rail
of
as
course.
this big land mass.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So, okay, with that said, bringing it back full circle, what is California high-speed rail's role in the future of US high-speed rail?
Yeah, so I guess in a way, California is arguably a kind of test case for how these large scale rail projects can be delivered in the US, showing both the negative and the positive approaches to learn from. Like, as the first project to really try and do this, of course, there were going to be major hiccups, and it's really important to look at those and avoid them in the future. And this isn't just in terms of construction, but also like procurement models, private partnerships, and how you structure a phased rollout of service. Because obviously, a national network isn't and doesn't appear all at once. Even in countries like China, it's taking time. It builds corridor by corridor, but it does require a shared direction in order for these corridors to eventually connect into something coherent and useful for lots and lots of people.
Yeah, so I guess it is really just about whether or not the US can move toward a connected system over time.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of momentum building over there at the moment, and events like the US High Speed Rail Conference really spotlight that. It's like definitely a space to watch. I mean, it is event season in the US coming up. Generally, you've got railway interchange happening at the beginning of June and then APTA Rail happening at the end. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion, and hopefully this discussion can keep transforming into concrete momentum and concrete delivery and contracts and projects that ultimately start serving Americans and start serving Americans in their generation. They need to speed up delivery in a way that people see the tangible impacts and positive effects. So I'm excited and hopeful for them.
Yeah, no, it's an extremely exciting time. And as you say, it is event season in the US, and we'll have a hell of a lot of coverage of them with you over there and everything
Mm.
that's going on. So, listeners, viewers, make sure to keep coming back to Railway News. We will be covering these events as and when they happen. As we've mentioned, Tiana's going to be out there for just around a month or so. So we're going to be getting a lot of content, a lot of related news out. So please do come back, check out Railway News, and keep up to date with everything going on with California High Speed Rail. And with that, we come to the end of this latest episode of All Routes Considered. It's been an interesting one. We've had some interesting technical hiccups to overcome that hopefully will be ironed out once Joey starts to do an edit later on this evening. So yeah, thank you so much for returning. We'll be back with you very soon. Take care, everybody, and keep
Bye.
taking transport. Bye.